Hello, welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we start Unit 8, Muslim Thought, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, Muhammad Iqbal, Maulana Maudoodi, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Let us have introduction about the unit. The Muslim thought in modern India can be understood properly only in its larger historical setting. It is important to note that the evolution of the Muslim political thought was a complex phenomenon involving historical context of the Muslims' social, cultural, and political life, and interactive process with the colonial rule, which had been established in India, particularly in the aftermath of the Revolution of 1857. Several issues had emerged, such as relative backwardness of Muslims in relation to modern tendencies, which had come in the wake of the establishment of the colonial rule. The question of accommodation of various social groups, including Muslims in the existing and future power structures, became an important issue which was widely debated among all groups. Equally important was the issue of religio-cultural identity of various communities, which went through a process of redefinition in the late 19th century as well as the first half of the 20th century. All these issues emerged over the years with varying responses from the different social groups, which in the long run affected inter-community relations. These developments also affected the political processes which were unfolding in the course of an articulation of anti-colonial nationalist ideology. While all these issues were matter of concern for all, it is important to recognize that the response of the Muslims to all these issues was not uniform but varied, since the Muslims did not constitute a monolithic community. The Muslims were divided on lines of language, region, and class as any other religious community. When a community is vertically as well as horizontally divided, the response to any issue would most certainly be as divided. It is vitally important to recognize that thoughts of several leaders that we shall be shortly discussing can only be seen in their evolutionary perspectives, since they were not fixed in a time frame and were constantly evolving. In the course of evolution of the thoughts of the person under discussion, we shall discover that in certain respects there is a continuity, while in other there is a contradiction. The contradiction and continuity may be seen as the running thread in the thoughts of all those under discussion. It is up to the readers to discern the meaning of those thoughts in historical time. Now we are going to discuss Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, 1817 to 1898. Sir Syed Ahmad Khan was one of the most formidable figures of the late 19th century India. He emerged on the Indian scene as one of the great reformers, educationist, and modernizer within the Muslim community. He was born on 17th October 1817 in one of the respected families associated with the Mughal court. Sir Syed was a direct witness to the declining fortunes of the Mughals and was conscious about the fact that while the glory of the Mughals was as good as gone, the political force which was gaining ground was that of the British. In any case, the British East India Company had already gained tremendous power in the eastern part of the India in the second half of the 18th century. Gradually, it had been spreading its influence in other parts of the India as well. The British had started knocking on the doors of Delhi under the Mughals, and by 1803 they had succeeded in confining the Mughal rulers within the precinct of the Kila-e-Mola, that is the Red Fort. It was a part of growing experience of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan to have seen that the Mughals were surviving on the suffrage of the British since 1803. It is not surprising, therefore, that Syed Ahmad Khan took a minor post with the British at the age of 21 years, despite some opposition in the family. Subsequently, he passed the examination of the Munsif and was appointed at Mainpuri. In 1842, he was transferred to Fatehpur Sikri and in 1846 reposted at Delhi and stayed here for about 9 years. During his stay at Delhi, he engaged himself in academic pursuits and, apart from other things, he produced an important work, Asar-e Sandedi, a monumental work on the monuments of Delhi, which was widely acclaimed. Later in 1855, he was given promotion and appointed as the Sadr Amin at Bijnor, while Sir Syed was posted here at Bijnor. The revolt of 1857 broke, which had shaken the British. Here at Bijnor, Sir Syed had played an active role in saving the lives of several British officers. In this revolt, Sir Syed's family too suffered loss of some family members and was able to take his mother and aunt to safety in Meerut and with great difficulty. Sir Syed, having seen the revolt and subsequently its brutal suppression by the British, was convinced that the British were too powerful and any attempt to resist them might not be fruitful at all. From this time onward, the British started suspecting the Muslims at large as they were violently opposed to them. As a consequence of such an approach, the Muslims were treated more harshly than any other social group involved in the revolt. The prospects looked bleak as regards the collective lives of the Muslims in India, and Sir Syed took it upon himself to bring about reconciliation between the Muslims and the British. In the immediate aftermath of the revolt, Sir Syed wrote several pamphlets on various issues concerning the revolt. The first was Tarikhe Sarkeshi Bijnor, with a narrative of the development as regards the revolt. However, more important was his Asbab I Bhagavat or Hind, published in 1858, in which he tried to explain various underlying causes of revolt. However, his central argument was that revolt came about because the British were entirely unaware of the Indian opinion, since Indians were deliberately kept out of the governance of their country. He argued, as if addressing the government of the day, that it is from voice of the people that government can learn whether its projects are likely to be well received. This security can never be acquired unless the people are allowed a share in the consultation of government. It is difficult to establish any correlation, but the fact remains that within a short time Indians were to be incorporated in the Governor General's Council as per the provisions of the Indian Council Act of 1861. After having convinced the British that it would serve their interest to take Indian opinion too in the governance of India, he wrote another pamphlet, The Loyal Mohammedans of India, in 1860, in which he argued that it was not true that all the Muslims were the enemy of the British as enumerated, that there were several Muslims who had stood by the British during the tremendous days of revolt. From this time onward, Sir Syed devoted his entire life to bring about reconciliation between the British and the Muslims. However, it was clear to him that his attempts at reconciliation would not bear fruit unless the Muslims' attitude towards many modern institutions, such as modern education, including science, etc., undergo some transformation. Now, the next point is contribution of modern education. Sir Syed was by now convinced that in order to stem the declining fortunes of the Muslims, it was important that they took to modern education as it was introduced by the British. With this purpose in mind, he founded the Scientific Society in 1863 at Ghazipur in Uttar Pradesh. The basic objective was to translate scientific literature into Urdu. In this project, he was supported by all, including several Hindu friends. The subjects such as mechanics, electricity, pharmaceutical, and natural philosophy received particular emphasis. Subsequently, this society was shifted to Aligarh. In 1866, Sir Syed started a journal on behalf of the society called the Indian Institute Gazette. During 1869 to 70, he traveled to England and was able to observe the British educational institutions and was impressed by them. Upon his return from this extended journey, he developed an idea that in order to improve educational standards of the Muslims of India, there must be modern educational institutions for them. This was the larger objective in mind with which he founded Mohammedan Anglo Oriental MAO College in 1875 or 1877. It was proposed that here, while modern education would be imparted to Muslims, they would also have some training in the preservation of their culture heritage. It is interesting to note that while MAO College was founded for Muslims, its doors were open to all. Many graduates in the early years of this college were Hindu. He also wanted the Indian Muslims to bring about reforms in their society with the help of a magazine called Tajib ul Akhlaq, in which he ridiculed many practices which were out of tune with modern trends of the time. For all his efforts to reconcile the Muslim with the British modern education, his advocacy for fresh interpretation of the Quran and keeping the doors of the MAO college open to all, he was fiercely attacked by the conservative Muslims. He remained undaunted in his endeavor. Next point is Hindu Muslim unity. Sir Syed was also a champion of the Hindu Muslim unity. He had once described the Hindus and Muslims as two beautiful eyes of a beautiful bride. He wrote two essays on Tehzeeb ul Alhaq, one in 1888 and another 1898, exhorting Muslims to give up killing of cows, since this would bring about a good neighborly relations between the Hindus and the Muslims. There were innumerable occasions when he strongly advocated for this unity between the two important religious communities. While these were some aspects of the various thoughts of Sir Syed, where he was committed to larger well-being of the Muslims, there were certain other aspects as well, where he seemed to suggest distinct political options for the Muslims and did not wish them ever to come closer to the Congress. Some of these tendencies were visible from the time the movement to replace Urdu in Persian script with that of Hindi in Nagari script had emerged in the United Provinces in 1867. The protagonist of this movement had argued that Urdu was not the language of the masses as Hindi was, and thus such a demand was raised. Sir Syed was disturbed by such a development, since he was himself given to use Urdu extensively in producing all kinds of literature and treatises. This sudden development on the language and script question led him to argue that now I am convinced that these two nations will not work unitedly in any cause. At present, there is no hostility between them, but on account of the so called educated people, it will increase 100-fold in the future. Later in the letter dated 29th April 1870 to Nawab Mohsinul Mulk, he wrote, This is proposal which will make Hindu-Muslim unity impossible to achieve. Muslim will never agree to Hindi, and if the Hindus, in accordance with their latest attitude, insist on Hindi, they will reject Urdu. The inevitable consequence of such a move will be that the two will be permanently separated. In a political realm too, Sir Syed did not have any conception of bringing religious communities together for certain political action. On the contrary, he maintained that these communities would have distinct political options separate from each other. This was the driving force which made him argue that the Indian National Congress was not in the best interest of the community of Muslims. He thought the Congress was likely to take a confrontationist stance in due course of time, which would be injurious to the interest of Muslims since they had already suffered as a consequence of the revolt of 1857. He further thought that a mere passing of resolution by the Congress did not make it national in character. In general, he argued with Muslims that they should keep away from the Congress. Sir Syed was also opposed to the principle of election, even for the local boards and district boards. He argued that keeping in view the kinds of social differences that existed in the Indian society, it would be imprudent to introduce the principle of elections. He suffered from a strange fear that in the event of elections where various religious communities would vote for leaders of respective communities, which would result in the political marginalization of the Muslims. Instead, he favored the principle of nomination, which would ensure certain representation of Muslims too. In making these arguments, Sir Syed betrayed certain elite bias. He himself was nominated to the Imperial Legislative Council in 1878. It is another matter altogether that there were not many among Muslims who paid heed to his exhortations. For instance, Badruddin Tayabji refuted Sir Syed's argument and said that Muslims' interest would be better served by advancing the general progress of India. There were scores of Muslim delegates participating in the proceedings of the Indian National Congress since 1887, and many of them came from the same province as Sir Syed's. The ulema of Darul Ulum at Deoband were issuing fatwas exhorting Muslims to join the Congress. It is important to remember that in a country such as India, where diversity of all hues existed for such a long time, religious communities were no exception. Every community threw up diverse options, keeping in mind the class, linguistic, regional, and other backgrounds in mind. After all, Sir Syed was not preaching any hatred between communities. However, his major concerns were to promote the interest of the Muslims at large, particularly the established groups. Sir Syed Ahmad Khan died on 27th March 1898. Now we wind up this lecture and thank you so much for your attention.